Today we are going to talk about another way to solve quadratic equations. So thus far we have talked about solving quadratics by factoring, solving quadratics by taking square roots, and now our third way, completing the square. So today we're going to talk about real solutions only. We'll get on to the other solutions in the second half of 5.5. So in the section 5.3, where we solved by taking square roots, we found that even if it was a squared binomial, so something of this form, x minus h squared equals c, it was very easy to solve by taking square roots. The big idea was just not to forget that plus and minus when you take the square root of both sides. Because of the fact that it is relatively easy to understand how to solve by taking square roots and relatively easy to actually do, we developed a system that can change any quadratic into a standard form, that's in standard form, into a perfect square. And so what that means is that completing the square is going to be a method that is going to work for all of your quadratic equations, and there aren't very many methods that will work for all of them. Factoring won't work for all of them because not every expression is factorable. Solving by square roots won't work for everything because not everything's in that form. But completing the square will work for every quadratic expression. So here are the steps. First kind of pre-step here, it's got the 2 stars. Before you start, you have to make sure that your constant term, the c, is all by itself or isolated on the right side of the equation. So basically that means that we want to start out with the form ax squared plus bx equals c, which is a little bit different because when we solved by factoring, we had to have it equal to 0. So this one's different. We want the c, the constant term, all by itself on the right side. So we're starting out with this example right here. So 2x squared plus 12x minus 4 equals 0. So our pre-step here is to move the 4 over by adding it. So add the 4 on both sides. And that gives us our ax squared plus bx equals c. So now we're ready to start completing the square. After we've got it in the right form, our first step is to factor the coefficient of the squared term out of the first 2 terms. This means left side only. You're not factoring anything out on the right. So left side only. We are factoring the coefficient out. Also notice, this is not GCF because we're not going to touch the x. We want to leave it squared. So whatever this a is, that's what you're factoring out. It doesn't matter what the other terms are. Whatever this a is, that's what you factor out. So only on the left side, if I factor the 2 out, you can see I'm going to be left with x squared plus 6x on the left. So we leave the right side alone. We factor that a out on the left side only. After we've factored out the a, then we're going to add a couple blanks to the equation. One here inside the parentheses, and then one on the right side. Now, some of our completing the squares, the coefficient, the a is 1, and if it is, that's great. That makes your life so much easier because you can skip to step 2. Here, obviously, we have an a value, so we factored that out. Now we're going to add 2 blanks. Now, whatever we do to one side of an equation, we always do to the other. So that's why when you add the blank on the left, you have to add one on the right. So now we need to figure out what is going to go in those blanks. On the left side, it's always the same idea. On the left side, it's always b divided by 2 squared. So you can see I've got this arrow here. B is this term right here. So b divided by 2 squared is what I'm going to put in the left side blank. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. 3 squared is 9. So that means I'm going to put 9 in this blank on the left side. Now, to fill in the blanks on the right side, you have to do a little squiggly thing that I've got drawn out here. You can't just make it 9 if there's a coefficient in front here. You have to multiply 2 times 9 to get what goes in my blank over here, which would be 18. Now, if there's nothing out front to multiply, then that's great. The blanks will match. But you have to remember to do the little swoop, multiply whatever was factored out by the blank on the left to get the blank on the right. So step 4, we filled in our blanks. Step 5, we are going to factor what's in parentheses. And it's always going to be factored as a PST because that's the purpose of completing the square. We call it completing the square because it's going to become a squared term. So now all I'm doing is I'm looking just at this part, x squared plus 6x plus 9, and I'm saying factor that as a PST. So it's always a PST. So when I factor that, square root of the first is x. So square root of x squared brought me that x. Square root of 9 gave me this 3. Sign in the middle gave me this plus in the middle. So x squared plus 6x plus 9 factors into this lovely x plus 3 squared. Notice that we still have the 2 out in front. That hasn't changed. On the right side, we're just combining the like terms that we see here. 4 plus 18 gives me 22. So those 5 steps that we just went through, we have completed the square. So now what we have looks exactly like what we have had in section 5.3, where we could solve by taking square roots. So to solve for x, we would divide by 2 on both sides first, which gives me this, x plus 3 squared equals 11. Then the squared term is alone, so we square root both sides. When I do that, I have to remember my plus or minus. Don't forget that. So I can simplify my left side here. Square root of x plus 3 squared is just x plus 3. 11 doesn't have any perfect square factors, so that does not simplify, so bring it down. Now finally, to get the x alone, I would subtract the 3 on both sides. These are not like terms, so it stays -3 plus or minus the square root of 11. So we go through our 5 steps in order to be able to solve by taking square roots. Okay, so this works out, the steps shows you step by step with one example. Now we're going to look at some examples to try. Example 1, these are not actually completing the square, it's just practicing filling in the blanks and factoring. So add a value to the blank that will make the expression a PST. So meaning do the b divided by 2 squared on all of these to fill in the blank, and then write that expression as a PST factored. So on A, all I'm going to do, my b is 8, so I'm going to do 8 divided by 2 squared. 8 divided by 2, oops, and I wrote the answer to that up there. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So now that I've got this filled in, now I'm going to factor it. So square root of the first, square root of x squared is x. Square root of 16 is 4. And sign of the middle goes in the middle. So x plus 4 squared. All right, I would like for you to try B, so pause it real quick. This shouldn't take you real long, but fill in the blank and then factor it as a PST, and then unpause. So here I've got -4 is my B, so I'm going to divide that by 2 and then square it. So -4 divided by 2 is -2. -2 squared is +4. So now to do the PST factoring, square root of the first would be x, square root of the last would be 2, and then sign in the middle would be a minus. So x minus 2 squared. All right, let's do another one that's a little bit trickier. Not that any of this example one is tricky, but I've got 5 divided by 2 squared. Now, 5 divided by 2 does not come out evenly. That doesn't mean you've done something wrong. It just means you're going to have to work with a fraction. Do not put any decimals in. No decimals. So fraction form only. So 5 over 2 squared, you just square the top and square the bottom. So that's going to be 25 over 4. So now I fill in my factoring the exact same way. I'm just going to have a fraction. Square root of x squared is x. Square root of 25 over 4 is my b over 2, so that's going to be 5 over 2. Sign in the middle was a plus. All right, so you try one like that. So pause it real quick, do D, and then unpause to see if you've gotten it right. We've got negative 11 over 2. I'm going to square that. So squaring the top would be 121. Squaring the bottom would be 4. So now I need to factor that. Square root of the first is x. Square root of the last is 11 over 2. And sign in the middle is a minus. So hopefully you got x minus 11 over 2 squared for that one. All right, so that hopefully helps you to know how to fill in the blank on the left side and how to factor the left side. So now let's put it all together. So you're following the steps we had on the front, and we are going to actually complete the square. So on the first one, first thing I do is check to make sure it's in the right form. Ax squared plus bx equals c. So this one is. I've got my x squareds and x's on the left, my coefficient or constant rather on the right. So first thing I'm going to do then, since I do not, if you look back at the steps, I don't have to factor out a coefficient of a squared term. I get to skip step 1 here because the coefficient on this one was 1. So that means I get to move on to step 2, which is to add blanks on each side. There is no parenthesis here because I didn't have anything to factor out. So blank on the left and blank on the right. So we just practiced filling in the blank, and actually if you look up, this is the same one as A as far as the left side. So 8 divided by 2 and then squared would be 4 squared, which is 16. Now remember, normally when you fill in the blank on the right side, you take whatever's in front and you multiply it by this. Now what's in front there is a 1, so 1 times 16 is just 16. So now left side, the next step, again, keep referring back to your steps until you have them memorized. After you have completed the square on the left and filled in the blanks, we're going to rewrite the left side as a PST. So just what we practiced in example 1, that left side is going to be x plus 4 squared. On the right side, I'm just going to combine my like terms. Negative 12 plus 16 is 4. So now I can actually solve it because I've finished with completing the square. So now I can actually solve it. So I'm going to take the square root on both sides. So on the left, I've got x plus 4. On the right, do not forget your plus or minus. The square root of 4 does come out evenly. It's 2. So then, to get the x alone, I would need to subtract this 4 on both sides. So I get negative 4 plus or minus 2. Now, you need to simplify that because those are like terms. So negative 4 plus 2 gives me negative 2. Negative 4 minus 2 gives me negative 6. So I've got x equals negative 2 and x equals negative 6 as my two solutions. So we have successfully completed the square. I would like you to try B on your own. Don't forget that before you can do anything, you need to move this over to the other side. So do that first, and I'd like for you to practice the completing the square and solving. So pause it for a minute and see if you can do this on your own. All right, so like I said, first thing you need to do is move that 15 over to the other side by adding it. So now this is in the correct form for completing the square. So after I do that, then I would need to factor out the coefficient, factor out what's in front here, but there is nothing. This is a 1 again, so that's great. That means I get to skip that step. So next, I would go to adding my blanks on both sides. And now I need to fill them in. So filling in my blank, I'm going to do -6 divided by 2 and square it. -6 divided by 2 is -3, squared is 9. To fill in the blank on the right side, remember I multiply what's out in front here by this blank, which is 1 this time, so 1 times 9 gives me 9. Now, factor the left side as your PST, so square root of x squared is x, square root of 9 is 3, sign in the middle was a minus, and put your squared on there. On the right side, we're just combining the like terms, so 15 plus 9 gives me 24. So I've completed the square. If you got up to that part right, great job. Now we just need to solve. So square root both sides. So that gives me x minus 3 equals plus or minus radical 24. Radical 24 does simplify, so I need to do that. So its biggest perfect square is 4. It's 4 times 6. So the square root of 4, I've got square root of 4 times square root of 6 when I break it down. So the square root of 4 gives me 2. The 6 is stuck because it's not a perfect square. So that gives me plus or minus 2 radical 6 on the right side. So now final step is to add 3. Again, these are not like terms. You can't add a plain number to a radical, so they stay separate. It stays 3 plus or minus 2 radical 6. All right, so if you were able to do that, great. Now we're going to move on to two that are just a little bit harder. So on C, first thing we do is check to make sure it's in the right form. I've got ax squared plus bx equals c, so I'm good to go there. Next step, factor out this term. So this one does have a 4 in front, so I need to factor that out on the left side. So that would leave me x squared plus 8x. Remember that in this step, you don't touch the right side. It stays how it was. After I factor out that coefficient, then I add my blanks. So blank on the left and a blank on the right. So now I need to fill in my blank. So this is an 8. 8 divided by 2 squared. We've done this one quite a few times and you're going to start to recognize them, is 16. Now to fill in the blank on the right side, I have to do my little swoop. 4 times 16 gives me, excuse me, my 64. So fill that in. So now left side, I need to factor that. The 4 stays in front. This PST, I factored this one twice already in this lesson. X, 4, sign in the middle this time is a plus. So squared equals, on the right side, -48 plus 64 is 16. Now, I always get people who get so excited they've got their square completed and they go to take square roots. Don't take square roots yet. Remember we learned in section 5.3 you have to have the squared term alone first. So you need to divide by this 4. We didn't have to do that on A and B because there was no coefficient. So divide by the 4 first. That's going to give me x plus 4 squared equals 4. Now I can take the square root on both sides. Lighten this up a little bit. Let's try purple. So square root, that gives me x plus 4 equals plus or minus square root of 4, which is 2. And so then subtract the 4 on both sides. So I've got -4 plus or minus 2, which gives me the exact same thing that I had in A. Notice it boiled down to end up being the same equation. So negative 4 plus 2 is negative 2. Negative 4 minus 2 is still negative 6. So you get the same answer on C that you did on A, which makes sense because if you look at the equation, C is really just A multiplied by 4. All right. Last one here. All right, this one looks a little messy for the beginning. It's definitely not in the right form, so I'm going to need to move some things around. I need to move this x term over here with its like term, and then I need to move my constant that was on the right over to the left. So these are going to cancel. Those are going to go away. So now I've got 3x squared plus 21x equals, let's see, 6 plus negative 6 is 0. So in this case, my C is 0, and that's okay because I've got ax squared plus bx on the left. So my next step is to factor out the term in front, so 3, and that gives me x squared plus 7x. After I factor out that term, I need to write some blanks in. So one inside the parentheses over here and one on the right side. And now fill it in. This one does not come out evenly. I've got 7 divided by 2 squared. So 7 divided by 2 doesn't come out evenly. So when I square it, square the top, 7 squared is 49. Square the bottom, 2 squared is 4. Now, when I go to fill in the blank on the right side, I need to multiply my 3 times my 49 over 4. So if you've got your fraction button on your calculator handy, that can help you. So 3 times 49 over 4, remember no decimals here. You want it in fraction form. It's going to give you 147 over 4. So now on the left side, I've got 3 factored form, x, because that's the square root of x squared. Square root of 49 over 4 is 7 over 2. The sign in the middle here was a plus. And then over on my right side, 0 plus 147 over 4 is just 147 over 4. So now, in order to take square roots, I need to divide by 3. Remember that dividing by 3 is the same as multiplying by 1/3. When I divide by 3 here, on the right side, divided by 3 is the same as multiplying by 1/3. So that's going to give me x plus 7 over 2 squared on my left side. On my right side, that's going to give me 147 over 12. And when you take 147 over 12, you will notice it does not come out evenly, but it does reduce. We can make this into 49 over 4. So you should always reduce if you can because it's going to make your life so much easier in the next step. So I'm going to make this 49 over 4. So now I've got the squared term alone on the left. My right side is as simplified as it goes. So that means now I can go ahead and take my square roots. Hopefully you can see why here it's so important to simplify on the right side, because now both of those are perfect squares. That comes out evenly. If I'd left it like this, I would have had to do a lot of simplifying. So don't forget your plus or minus, but the square root of 49 is 7. Square root of 4 is 2. So then I subtract the 7 over 2 from both sides. And x equals 2 different things. Negative 7 over 2 plus 7 over 2 is just 0. And then negative 7 over 2 minus 7 over 2. When they have the same denominator, you just combine the tops. So that's negative 14 over 2, which negative 14 over 2 is just negative 7. So x equals 0 and x equals -7 are your solutions there. And that is it.